The rain had been falling over Portland, Maine, since before dawn. Not the violent kind that arrived with summer storms, but the quiet, persistent rain that blurred the line between the Atlantic Ocean and the gray November sky. It washed over brick sidewalks, rolled down old storefront windows, and left the harbor wrapped in a pale veil of mist. Sophia Bennett barely noticed it. She stood inside the Portland Maritime Museum, staring at a centuries-old brass telescope displayed beneath soft gallery lights. Visitors wandered slowly through the exhibits behind her, reading plaques and taking photographs, but their voices sounded distant. Her attention wasn't on the telescope. It was on the small envelope resting in her coat pocket. The envelope had no stamp. No address. Only her name. It had appeared on her office desk that morning before the museum opened. No one had seen who left it. She had asked the security staff. The cameras covering the entrance showed dozens of early visitors entering the building, but none carried anything resembling the cream-colored envelope now folded inside her pocket. The handwriting looked strangely familiar. Elegant. Careful. Almost old-fashioned. She had not opened it. Not yet. Something about it made her hesitate. Sophia had spent nearly 12 years working as a curator. Every week she handled journals written by sailors, personal letters carried across oceans, and documents that survived wars, shipwrecks, and generations of forgotten families. She respected unopened letters. Experience had taught her they sometimes changed lives. At 33, her own life had become almost painfully predictable. She lived alone in a renovated apartment overlooking Casco Bay. She arrived at the museum before sunrise every morning. She catalogued donations. Prepared exhibitions. Attended historical conferences. Returned home after sunset. Occasionally she met friends for dinner. Occasionally she visited her parents outside Augusta. The routine had become comfortable. Comfort, she often believed, was simply another word for slowly disappearing. She finally removed the envelope. The paper felt unusually thick. Handmade. Its edges showed slight yellowing despite remaining perfectly preserved. She carefully unfolded the letter inside. Only 3 sentences had been written. Some promises are never broken. They are only forgotten. Come to Black Harbor Lighthouse on Saturday before sunset. No signature. No explanation. Nothing else. Sophia read the message twice. Then a third time. Black Harbor Lighthouse. The name stirred something buried deep inside her memory. Not because she had visited it recently. Because she had visited it only once. 23 years earlier. She had been 10 years old. The memory appeared only in fragments. A windy afternoon. A lighthouse standing alone above dark cliffs. A little boy building something from driftwood near the shore. Her father calling her back to the car before she learned his name. The memory ended there. She had never returned. The lighthouse stood nearly 3 hours north of Portland on one of Maine's quieter stretches of coastline. Tourists rarely visited. The surrounding village had slowly emptied as fishing families moved elsewhere over the decades. Sophia folded the letter once more. Logic suggested throwing it away. Someone was almost certainly playing an elaborate prank. Yet logic failed to explain the handwriting. Or why the lighthouse's name awakened memories she had not considered in over 20 years. Saturday felt impossibly far away. The following days passed unusually slowly. She immersed herself in work, helping prepare a new exhibition dedicated to New England shipwrecks. Among the donated artifacts stood an old ship's bell recovered from the Atlantic nearly 70 years earlier. Its bronze surface remained scarred by saltwater. A small inscription circled the rim. Every voyage leaves something behind. Sophia paused longer than necessary while reading those words. For reasons she couldn't explain, they echoed the mysterious letter waiting inside her apartment. By Friday evening curiosity had quietly defeated caution. She packed an overnight bag. A camera. A notebook. A flashlight. Nothing more. She told no one where she was going. Early Saturday morning she left Portland before sunrise. The highway gradually narrowed into quiet coastal roads bordered by forests of pine and maple. Autumn had nearly ended. Most leaves already covered the ground, leaving skeletal branches reaching toward pale skies. Fishing villages appeared every few miles. Some consisted of little more than a church, a harbor, and several weathered houses overlooking the Atlantic. By late afternoon the GPS lost signal. Sophia followed faded road signs instead. Eventually she reached a gravel road descending toward the sea. At its end stood Black Harbor. The village looked almost untouched by time. Fewer than 30 houses remained occupied. An old general store stood beside the harbor. Several lobster boats floated quietly against worn wooden docks. Everything moved more slowly there. As though the outside world had forgotten the place existed. The lighthouse rose on a rocky peninsula beyond the village. White stone. Black lantern room. Standing proudly against endless gray water. Sophia parked near the entrance path. The wind carried the unmistakable scent of salt and seaweed. Waves crashed rhythmically against the cliffs below. The sun hovered low above the horizon. Exactly as the letter had instructed. She climbed the narrow path toward the lighthouse. No one appeared nearby. Only seabirds circled overhead. The old building remained closed to visitors for the season. Its heavy wooden door was locked. Sophia looked around. Nothing. Perhaps she had made a mistake. Perhaps no one had ever intended to meet her. She almost turned back toward the parking area. Then she noticed something resting on the stone wall overlooking the ocean. Another envelope. Held in place beneath a smooth white seashell. This one bore only 2 handwritten words. For Sophia. She slowly picked it up. Unlike the first letter, this envelope felt heavier. Inside rested an old black and white photograph. It showed 2 children standing beside Black Harbor Lighthouse. A little girl wearing a bright smile despite windswept hair. A boy holding a small wooden sailboat. Both appeared no older than 10. Sophia recognized the little girl instantly. It was herself. Her breath caught. She had never seen the photograph before. She looked at the boy. His face awakened a faint memory from that long-forgotten afternoon by the sea. On the back of the photograph someone had written one final sentence. He kept his promise. The question is, did you? Sophia remained standing beside the stone wall, unable to take her eyes off the faded photograph. The wind curled around the lighthouse, carrying the rhythmic roar of waves striking the cliffs below, but she barely heard it. Her entire attention remained fixed on the smiling faces frozen in time. She remembered the jacket she had worn. She remembered collecting smooth stones along the beach. She even remembered dropping one into the ocean and pretending she had thrown it all the way to Canada. Yet she could not remember the boy. Only fragments remained. A laugh. A wooden sailboat. Blue eyes that seemed unusually serious for a child. Nothing more. She carefully slipped the photograph back into its envelope before examining the area around the lighthouse once again. Whoever had left it could not have gone far. The gravel path remained empty. No cars stood in the parking area besides her own. The nearby forest appeared perfectly still beneath the evening sky. It was as though the envelope had simply appeared by itself. Sophia slowly walked around the lighthouse. The building had clearly seen better days. Cracks spread through portions of the white stone walls, while rust-colored streaks ran beneath the lantern room where decades of Atlantic storms had worn away protective paint. A heavy chain secured the entrance gate. A weathered information board explained that the lighthouse had been automated nearly 25 years earlier. The final lighthouse keeper had retired soon afterward. Since then, only maintenance crews visited several times each year. Sophia read every line, hoping to find some clue. Near the bottom of the sign, one sentence caught her attention. For historical inquiries regarding Black Harbor Lighthouse, contact Samuel Whitaker, former lighthouse keeper. A local address had been handwritten beneath the printed text. The name meant nothing to her. Still, it was the only lead she possessed. The village lay only a short walk away. As twilight settled across the coastline, warm lights gradually appeared inside several small houses overlooking the harbor. The general store remained open despite the late hour. Its wooden floors creaked softly beneath Sophia's footsteps. Shelves stocked canned food, fishing supplies, homemade jams, postcards, and necessities that larger supermarkets had long replaced elsewhere. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman reading a newspaper. She looked up and smiled politely. Visitors were uncommon during November. Sophia purchased a bottle of water she did not really need before asking whether she knew Samuel Whitaker. The woman nodded immediately. Everyone, it seemed, knew Samuel. He still lived in the cottage nearest the lighthouse road. He never really left, she explained. Even after retirement. Sophia thanked her and stepped back outside. Darkness had nearly settled over Black Harbor. Only the lighthouse beam now swept across the Atlantic every few seconds, illuminating drifting mist before disappearing once again. Samuel's cottage stood exactly where the shopkeeper had described. A small white house faced the sea. Its porch contained several weathered rocking chairs. A brass ship's bell hung beside the entrance. Soft yellow light glowed through lace curtains. Sophia hesitated before knocking. Footsteps approached slowly. The door opened. Samuel Whitaker appeared older than she had imagined. His white beard reached almost to his chest. Deep lines crossed his face like maps of countless winters spent beside the Atlantic. Yet his gray eyes remained remarkably sharp. Before Sophia could introduce herself, Samuel quietly spoke her name. "You're later than I expected." The sentence froze her in place. "You know who I am?" Samuel smiled faintly. "I've been expecting you for nearly 23 years. The words settled heavily between them. Sophia searched his face for any sign that this might somehow be a misunderstanding. She found none. Samuel stepped aside and invited her inside. The cottage smelled faintly of cedar wood, old books, and fresh coffee. Every wall displayed maritime charts, antique clocks, framed photographs of ships, and paintings of storms crashing against rocky shores. The entire home felt less like a house than a small museum. Samuel gestured toward a chair near the fireplace. Without asking whether she wanted coffee, he quietly prepared 2 cups. Only after placing one before her did he sit opposite. Neither spoke immediately. The fire cracked softly between them. Finally, Samuel opened a small wooden box resting on the table. Inside lay dozens of envelopes. Every one addressed in the same elegant handwriting. Sophia's breath caught. The handwriting matched the mysterious letters. "You wrote them?" Samuel slowly shook his head. "No." He lifted one envelope carefully. "I only promised to deliver them." Sophia stared at the collection. Some appeared decades old. Others looked almost new. They were written by someone who knew you'd eventually come back. Her mind struggled to understand. Who? Samuel looked toward the fire before answering. "A boy named Noah Sullivan." The name awakened nothing. She wished it had. She searched every corner of her memory. Nothing. Samuel seemed unsurprised. "You remember pieces," he said quietly. "The lighthouse. The beach. The sailboat." Sophia looked at him in astonishment. "How do you know that?" "Because I was here." He reached toward an old photograph hanging above the fireplace. It showed Samuel standing beside the lighthouse many years earlier. Next to him stood a smiling couple. Between them were 2 children. One was Sophia. The other was the boy from the photograph. Samuel carefully removed the frame from the wall and handed it to her. The image had clearly been taken during summer. The children held small wooden boats they had painted themselves. Both were laughing. The adults appeared equally happy. Sophia turned the frame over. Written neatly across the back was a date. August 14, 2002. Her heart began racing. She had been 10 years old. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "You and Noah met only once. One afternoon. But children sometimes measure time differently than adults." Sophia listened without speaking. "You spent nearly the entire day together. Building boats. Collecting shells. Climbing every rock your parents would allow. When your family left, the 2 of you made a promise." Sophia looked up. "What promise?" Samuel smiled sadly. "To meet here again exactly 20 years later." The room became completely silent. Sophia almost laughed. Not because the story sounded impossible. Because it sounded exactly like something 2 children would invent. A promise made without understanding what 20 years actually meant. But I never came back. Samuel nodded. No. And Noah? The old lighthouse keeper looked toward the window where the rotating lighthouse beam briefly illuminated the room. He did. Sophia felt an unexpected weight settle inside her chest. Every year. Samuel nodded once more. Every single year. The fire crackled quietly between them. Outside, the Atlantic continued breaking endlessly against the cliffs. Samuel gently pushed the wooden box toward her. There are 23 letters. He wrote one every year. They all belong to you. Sophia stared at the box in complete silence. 23 years. 23 unopened letters. Waiting for someone who never knew they existed. Slowly, almost afraid to touch them, she lifted the oldest envelope from the stack. On its front, written in careful handwriting, were 5 simple words. To Sophia, if you return. Sophia held the first envelope carefully, almost afraid that opening it might somehow disturb the years it had quietly survived. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the seal remained perfectly intact. 23 years had passed since it had been written. 23 winters, springs, summers, and autumns. 23 birthdays. 23 Christmas mornings. Someone had carried this letter through all of them. She looked at Samuel. You never mailed them? The old lighthouse keeper slowly shook his head. No. That wasn't the promise. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes following the dancing flames inside the fireplace. Noah believed that if the letters ever reached you, they should be placed directly into your hands. Sophia carefully opened the envelope. The handwriting belonged to a child. The letters leaned unevenly across the page, some larger than others, words occasionally squeezed into empty spaces where there was no longer enough room. She smiled despite herself. The innocence of it felt almost painful. The letter described their afternoon beside the lighthouse. Noah wrote about the tiny wooden sailboats they had carved from driftwood with Samuel's old pocketknife. He explained that Sophia's boat had floated farther than his because she insisted on launching it from the highest rock near the shore. He admitted pretending not to be disappointed when his own boat drifted back toward the beach. Near the bottom of the page he had written only one promise. I'll come back next year. You'll probably win again. Sophia stared at those words. The memory returned unexpectedly. Not as complete images. As sensations. Cold seawater around her shoes. The smell of wet pine. A little boy laughing after slipping on seaweed-covered rocks. For years she had believed the memory belonged to a dream. It hadn't. Samuel quietly poured more coffee. You remembered something. It wasn't a question. Sophia nodded. Only pieces. The rest will come. She looked toward the stack of unopened letters. What happened after that day? Samuel remained silent for several moments. Finally, he answered. Your father accepted a job in Chicago. You left Maine 2 weeks later. Sophia closed her eyes. Now she remembered. The move. Packing boxes. Long highways stretching endlessly west. Her parents promising she would make new friends. She had. Eventually. Life had continued exactly as children's lives always do. School. College. A career. The years quietly erased countless small memories. Including one promise made beside an old lighthouse. What about Noah? Samuel smiled sadly. He never forgot. The old lighthouse keeper stood and walked toward a bookshelf near the window. From one shelf he removed a weathered notebook bound in dark blue leather. The corners had softened with age. Several pages bulged where photographs had been tucked inside. He visited every year. Samuel placed the journal on the table. He asked me to write down the dates. Sophia opened it carefully. The first entry read simply. August 14, 2003. Noah waited from noon until sunset. The next page. August 14, 2004. Rain all afternoon. Noah waited anyway. Another. August 14, 2005. Brought a new wooden boat. Left it beside the lighthouse. Sophia continued turning pages. The entries remained short. Year after year. Always the same date. Sometimes Samuel added details about the weather. Sometimes about the tides. Occasionally he mentioned that Noah had grown taller. Started high school. Learned photography. Entered college. Became an engineer. Returned wearing a business suit instead of jeans. The years unfolded quietly across the pages. Always ending with the same sentence. He waited until sunset. Sophia stopped reading. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She imagined a teenager standing alone beside the lighthouse. Then a young man. Then an adult. Returning every August for someone who never came. It wasn't because he believed you had forgotten, Samuel said softly. He believed something had simply prevented you from keeping your promise. Sophia looked toward the fire. I did forget. Samuel nodded. Children do. But Noah always said forgetting isn't the same as breaking a promise. The words lingered in the room. Outside, the lighthouse completed another slow sweep across the ocean. Sophia noticed another photograph tucked inside the journal. She removed it carefully. Noah appeared to be around 16 years old. He stood beside the lighthouse holding a camera around his neck. The smile remained the same as in the childhood picture. Only older. More thoughtful. She turned the photograph over. Written neatly across the back were 6 words. Year 6. Still waiting for tomorrow. Her chest tightened. She had spent years believing memories disappeared naturally. Now she wondered whether forgotten memories continued existing somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. Samuel watched her quietly. He never asked me to convince you. He only asked me to keep the letters. Sophia looked at the remaining envelopes. Each represented another year. Another version of Noah. Another chapter of a life she knew nothing about. She wanted to read them all. She also feared what they might reveal. What if I had never come back? Samuel smiled gently. Then I suppose I'd have become the oldest postman in Maine. Sophia laughed softly for the first time that evening. The sound surprised both of them. It felt strangely out of place among so many years of waiting. Samuel stood and walked toward the window. The lighthouse closes to visitors every winter. But I still walk there almost every evening. He paused. Old habits survive retirement. Sophia joined him. The Atlantic stretched into darkness beyond the cliffs. The rotating beacon continued painting slow circles across the water. There is something else, Samuel said. She looked at him. Noah came this afternoon. Her heart skipped. What? He arrived before noon. He placed the second envelope on the stone wall. Then he left. Sophia stared at him. Why would he leave? Samuel's answer came almost as a whisper. Because after 23 years. He finally believed you weren't coming. The sentence struck her harder than she expected. She looked toward the lighthouse standing silently above the cliffs. Only hours separated her arrival from his departure. 23 years of waiting. And they had missed each other by less than an hour. Samuel reached into his pocket. He removed a folded piece of paper. He left this in case you ever arrived. Sophia unfolded it slowly. Unlike the childhood letters, the handwriting belonged to an adult. Confident. Steady. There was only one sentence. Some people become part of your life. Others become part of the person you grow into, even if you never see them again. No signature was necessary. Sophia folded the note carefully. For the first time since arriving in Black Harbor, she realized this story had not ended. It had simply been waiting. Waiting for 2 people who no longer knew whether they were searching for each other. Or for the versions of themselves they had left behind beside an old lighthouse 23 years earlier. Sophia barely slept that night. Samuel had offered her the small guest room overlooking the ocean, but sleep refused to come. The old cottage settled quietly with every passing hour, its wooden beams creaking softly as cold Atlantic winds pressed against the walls. Every few minutes the rotating beam of Black Harbor Lighthouse crossed her bedroom window before disappearing once again into the darkness. Each sweep of light reminded her of the same thought. She had arrived too late. Not by years. Not by months. By less than an hour. She lay awake imagining another version of the day. One in which she had left Portland a little earlier. One in which traffic had been lighter. One in which she had skipped stopping for coffee along the highway. In that version, Noah would still have been standing beside the lighthouse. Instead, they had become strangers separated by only a single hour after 23 years. The irony felt almost unbearable. Morning finally arrived beneath a cloudless sky. For the first time since she had entered Black Harbor, sunlight covered the village. Fishing boats drifted slowly out of the harbor while gulls circled overhead, their cries echoing across the calm Atlantic. Sophia carried the wooden box of letters onto Samuel's porch. She looked at the stack of envelopes for several minutes before choosing the next one. The date read August 14, 2004. Inside, Noah's handwriting had already become steadier than the year before. He wrote about bringing 2 sandwiches because he believed Sophia might be hungry after the long drive to Black Harbor. He admitted eating both himself before sunset because waiting always made him hungry. At the bottom of the page he had drawn 2 tiny sailboats floating beside each other. One carried the letter N. The other carried S. Sophia smiled despite the tears gathering in her eyes. It was such a simple thought. An 11-year-old boy packing lunch for someone who never arrived. Samuel joined her outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her without asking what she had been reading. After a long silence, Sophia finally asked the question that had occupied her mind since the previous evening. Where does Noah live now? Samuel looked toward the harbor before answering. Boston. She blinked. Boston? He nodded. For nearly 8 years. The answer stunned her. Boston. The city where she had lived and worked for the past decade. She thought about crowded subway stations, bookstores, coffee shops, museums, public parks, and busy sidewalks. How many times had they unknowingly passed each other? How many mornings had they stood in the same line for coffee? How many evenings had they walked the same streets without recognizing the face from a forgotten childhood memory? Life suddenly felt impossibly small. Samuel smiled gently. Sometimes people spend years searching for someone who's been living only a few miles away. After breakfast, Samuel led Sophia behind the lighthouse toward an old cedar boathouse. The building leaned slightly toward the sea, its walls weathered by decades of Atlantic storms. Inside, shelves overflowed with lanterns, ropes, maritime charts, antique tools, and carefully labeled wooden boxes. Samuel walked directly toward a tall cabinet standing against the far wall. From its upper shelf he removed a long wooden case. He placed it carefully on a workbench before lifting the lid. Sophia stared in amazement. Inside rested more than 20 miniature sailboats. Each had been carved entirely by hand. Each represented a different year. The earliest boats looked simple, clearly made by a child still learning how to work with wood. The later ones became increasingly detailed. Tiny anchors. Hand-sewn sails. Perfectly carved hulls. Every boat carried a year carved discreetly beneath the keel. Samuel lifted the final sailboat from the collection. Unlike the others, this one remained unfinished. Its mast had not yet been attached. The deck still needed sanding. He started this one a few weeks ago, Samuel said quietly. He stopped working on it yesterday. Sophia gently held the unfinished boat. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt as though someone expected to return and finish it. She couldn't explain why that thought comforted her. Before leaving Black Harbor, Sophia walked alone toward the lighthouse one last time. The stone wall overlooking the ocean remained exactly where she had found the second envelope. Nothing rested there now. Only the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below. She placed one hand on the cold stone. I came, she whispered. The wind immediately carried the words out across the Atlantic. No one heard them. Still, saying them somehow mattered. The drive back to Boston felt entirely different from the journey north. Yesterday she had been chasing a mystery. Today she carried 23 years of someone's hope on the passenger seat beside her. Every now and then she glanced toward the wooden box. It no longer seemed filled with letters. It seemed filled with time itself. Monday morning brought her back to the museum. Visitors wandered through the galleries while school groups filled the halls with excited voices. Sophia tried to return to her usual routine. She catalogued artifacts, answered emails, prepared exhibition notes. Nothing held her attention. Every handwritten journal reminded her of Noah's letters. Every historical object suddenly felt personal. During her lunch break she searched public records. Noah Sullivan. Hundreds of names appeared. Doctors, teachers, engineers, lawyers, photographers, architects. None gave her enough information. Boston was simply too large. Finding one person without more details felt almost impossible. That evening she opened 3 more letters. The years slowly unfolded before her. Age 12. Age 13. Age 14. Noah wrote about learning to sail. Winning a photography competition. Breaking his arm while climbing rocks near the lighthouse. Applying to high school. Making new friends. Losing his grandfather. His writing changed gradually each year. The child slowly became a teenager. Then a young man. Yet one sentence appeared in almost every letter. Maybe next year. Sophia noticed something else. He never blamed her. Not once. He never accused her of forgetting. He never questioned whether she had broken her promise. Instead, every letter assumed that something beyond her control had simply prevented her from returning. The kindness of that belief hurt more than anger ever could. Late Thursday evening she reached the 17th letter. Inside rested only a single photograph. Black Harbor Lighthouse surrounded by snow. On the back Noah had written a single sentence. Some places teach us patience. Sophia looked around her apartment. Books lined every wall. Historical documents covered her desk. Everything suddenly felt temporary. For years she had spent her career preserving other people's memories while quietly neglecting her own life. She walked to the window. Boston stretched endlessly beneath thousands of lights. Somewhere within that enormous city lived the boy she had promised to meet. Neither of them knew how close they had been for years. Neither realized that fate was already preparing to bring them together once more. Not beside the lighthouse. But in the last place either of them would ever expect. Friday arrived with the kind of cold rain that turned Boston into a city of reflections. Sidewalks shimmered beneath streetlights, umbrellas drifted through the evening crowds, and the Charles River disappeared beneath low clouds that seemed to erase the horizon. Sophia left the museum later than usual, carrying the wooden box of letters inside her leather satchel as though it contained something fragile enough to break with a careless step. In many ways, it did. She had read 17 of the 23 letters. Each one revealed another year of Noah's life. Each one made him feel less like a memory and more like someone she had somehow known all along. She stopped at a small cafe a few blocks from the museum, one she had visited dozens of times over the years. It was quiet, filled mostly with students reading textbooks and professionals typing on laptops while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Sophia ordered tea instead of coffee. She sat near the window and removed the 18th envelope. The date written in the corner read, August 14, 2020. The handwriting had become calm and deliberate. Noah wrote that the world had grown strangely quiet that year. The pandemic had emptied streets, closed businesses, and separated people from one another. Even so, he had driven to Black Harbor. The lighthouse had stood exactly as it always had. The ocean had continued breathing against the cliffs without caring about lockdowns or uncertainty. He admitted that, for the first time, he had almost stayed home. Not because he had stopped believing. Because he wondered whether hope could quietly become a habit instead of a choice. At the bottom of the page he had written, If you never come back, I hope you're happy wherever life carried you. That would make waiting worth it. Sophia lowered the letter. She realized she had stopped drinking her tea several minutes earlier. The cup had grown cold. She looked through the rain-covered window at strangers hurrying home. How many lives surrounded her every day without her knowing their stories? How many promises existed quietly beneath ordinary routines? She folded the letter carefully. As she reached for the next envelope, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Sophia? She looked up. It was Olivia Carter, one of the museum's volunteer researchers. Olivia smiled warmly before asking whether she could join her. They had worked together for nearly 3 years. Their conversations usually revolved around maritime history, restoration projects, and forgotten archives. Tonight, however, Olivia noticed something different almost immediately. "You look like someone who's been awake for 3 days." Sophia laughed softly. "That's not entirely inaccurate." Olivia studied her expression. Something happened. For a moment Sophia considered telling the entire story. The lighthouse. The letters. Samuel. Noah. Instead she simply smiled. "I found something that changed the way I look at the past." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes history has a strange habit of finding us before we go looking for it. The sentence lingered in Sophia's thoughts long after Olivia left. History had found her. Not inside a museum, but beside an old lighthouse. The following morning she decided to do something she had avoided all week. She searched through the museum's employee database. Not because she expected to find Noah. Because dozens of local architects, photographers, and historians regularly collaborated with the museum on exhibitions. Perhaps his name had appeared somewhere. She typed. Noah Sullivan. Only one result appeared. Not an employee. A guest contributor. 3 years earlier, he had donated a collection of coastal photographs for a temporary exhibition documenting historic lighthouses throughout New England. Sophia's pulse quickened. She opened the archived exhibition records. There it was. A contributor profile. Noah Sullivan. Architectural photographer. Beneath the name appeared a small portrait. She froze. The face was older than the boy from the photograph. The same blue eyes. The same thoughtful smile. The same quiet expression that somehow carried both hope and patience. She stared at the image for several long moments. After 23 years, she finally knew what he looked like. The exhibition files included an address. Not a home address. A photography studio located in Boston's Seaport District. Sophia copied it onto a piece of paper before she could change her mind. For the rest of the day she tried convincing herself not to go. What would she even say? "Hello. I'm the girl who forgot our promise. I'm 23 years late." Would he even want to see her? The final 6 letters remained unread. Perhaps they contained answers she didn't yet understand. Perhaps they explained why he had stopped waiting. Sunday morning arrived bright and unusually warm for late November. Sophia found herself standing outside the photography studio before she consciously decided to drive there. The building occupied the ground floor of a restored warehouse overlooking Boston Harbor. Large windows displayed black and white photographs of lighthouses, abandoned fishing villages, rocky coastlines, and empty beaches. Every image captured places that seemed suspended outside time. She immediately recognized Black Harbor Lighthouse in one of them. The same stone wall. The same cliffs. The same lonely horizon. She slowly entered. The studio was quiet. Wooden floors. White walls. Shelves filled with cameras and photography books. A young receptionist greeted her politely. Sophia asked whether Noah Sullivan was available. The receptionist's smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry. He left yesterday." Sophia felt her stomach tighten. Left? He accepted a month-long assignment. Where? The receptionist checked the appointment calendar. Maine. Sophia almost laughed. Of course. Might I ask where in Maine? The receptionist hesitated. I'm not really supposed to give out client schedules. Sophia nodded, embarrassed. Of course. She thanked her and turned toward the door. Just before leaving, the receptionist spoke again. If you're a friend. Sophia stopped. He mentioned photographing Black Harbor Lighthouse this week. The words echoed in her mind. Black Harbor. Again. She stepped back into the cold Boston air. The Atlantic wind swept between the buildings, carrying the scent of salt across the harbor. For the second time in less than 2 weeks. They had missed each other. Not by years. Not by months. By a single day. Sophia looked toward the ocean. She could almost believe fate was testing how determined two people could remain before finally allowing their paths to cross. This time, however, she wasn't planning to stop searching. Sophia left Boston before sunrise. This time she carried no uncertainty. Only purpose. The wooden box containing Noah's remaining letters rested on the passenger seat exactly where it had been the week before. Outside the windshield, the city slowly disappeared behind morning fog as the highway carried her north toward Maine. The drive felt strangely familiar now. The forests. The fishing villages. The narrow coastal roads winding beside the Atlantic. Only her thoughts had changed. She no longer wondered whether Noah existed. She wondered whether she was already too late. By early afternoon she reached Black Harbor. The village looked almost identical to her previous visit. Fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor. The old general store remained open. Children rode bicycles along the quiet streets. Only the weather had changed. Bright sunshine reflected across the water, making the lighthouse visible from miles away. Sophia drove directly toward Samuel's cottage. His truck stood outside. So did another vehicle. A dark green pickup covered with road dust. Her heartbeat quickened. She parked quietly. Before she could reach the porch, Samuel stepped outside carrying a toolbox. He smiled the moment he saw her. "I had a feeling you'd be back." Sophia glanced toward the unfamiliar truck. "Is he here?" Samuel looked at the vehicle before answering. He was. The single word felt like another door closing. "He spent the morning photographing the cliffs. He left about 20 minutes ago." Sophia laughed helplessly. Again. Always just a little too late. Samuel noticed the disappointment on her face. "You should stop blaming the clock." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the porch railing. "For 23 years you've been arriving at different moments. Perhaps the important thing isn't arriving first. It's arriving ready." The sentence stayed with her. Samuel handed her a folded map of the coastline. "Noah always follows the same route when he photographs." A thin red pencil line wound through several remote locations. Rocky beaches. Old piers. Abandoned fishing cabins. Hidden coves. The final mark rested several miles north. A place labeled Gray Point. "He'll probably finish there before sunset." Sophia thanked him and immediately returned to her car. The road to Gray Point narrowed into little more than gravel. Tall pines surrounded both sides, blocking most of the afternoon sunlight. Eventually the trees opened onto dramatic cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. The view stole her breath. Hundreds of feet below, waves crashed against dark granite. Far offshore, seals rested upon scattered rocks while gulls drifted effortlessly above the wind. Sophia stepped from the car. The area appeared empty. She walked slowly along the cliff path. Only the sound of the ocean accompanied her. After several minutes she noticed fresh footprints leading toward a narrow overlook. Camera tripod marks remained pressed into the damp ground. He had been there. Recently. She reached the overlook. No one. Only endless ocean. She closed her eyes for a moment. Another missed chance. As she turned back toward the trail, something caught her attention. Resting beside a weathered wooden bench stood a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. She unfolded it. Inside rested another miniature sailboat. Unlike the unfinished one Samuel had shown her, this boat had been completed. Its tiny white sail carried a single painted lighthouse. A folded note lay beneath it. Sophia recognized Noah's handwriting immediately. "Some views become more beautiful when shared. Maybe next year." The familiar sentence nearly broke her heart. Maybe next year. How many times had he written those words? How many times had he believed them? She sat on the bench overlooking the Atlantic. For nearly an hour she remained there, holding the miniature sailboat while reading another letter from the wooden box. This one had been written only 3 years earlier. Noah described realizing that waiting had slowly changed him. He no longer came to the lighthouse expecting someone to appear. He came because returning reminded him that hope was something a person chose to practice. Even when no one was watching. Sophia carefully folded the letter. She suddenly understood something important. The lighthouse had never been the real promise. The promise had been remembering. As evening approached, she returned to Black Harbor. Samuel was repairing an old wooden fence beside his cottage. He looked up as she parked. "You found the boat." Sophia nodded. "He knew I'd come." Samuel smiled. "He leaves one there every time. In case someone arrives after he's gone." She looked toward the lighthouse standing against the evening sky. "Does he always miss me?" Samuel laughed quietly. "No. You've only been searching for each other for 2 weeks. Life spent 23 years bringing you back to the same place. I'd say it's making excellent progress." That evening Sophia stayed in the guest room once again. After dinner she opened the 21st letter. Then the 22nd. The final unopened envelope remained alone inside the wooden box. She hesitated before breaking its seal. This was the letter Noah had written only days earlier. The last one. The handwriting was calm. Confident. Different from all the others. He wrote that 23 years had finally taught him something unexpected. Some promises were never meant to guarantee that two people would meet again. Sometimes they existed simply to ensure neither person forgot the kindness they had once shared. Near the end he confessed that he had decided to stop writing letters. Not because hope had disappeared. Because hope no longer needed paper. If Sophia ever returned, she would find her own way. If she never did, then the lighthouse would keep the memories safely for both of them. The final sentence was shorter than any he had written before. "Wherever you are, thank you for giving one summer afternoon a lifetime of meaning." Sophia slowly folded the page. Tears blurred the ink. Outside, the lighthouse beam swept across the window once more. For the first time, she no longer felt that she was chasing the past. She was moving toward the future. She simply didn't know how close it already was. At that very moment, less than 10 miles away, Noah stood alone on an abandoned pier reviewing the photographs he had taken throughout the day. One image caught his attention. Far in the distance, almost too small to notice, a woman stood on the cliffs at Gray Point holding a tiny white sailboat. He zoomed in. The photograph wasn't perfectly sharp. But it was clear enough. For a long time he stared at the screen without moving. Somewhere deep inside, a memory that had waited 23 years quietly whispered a single name. Sophia. Noah did not sleep that night. The photograph remained open on his laptop long after midnight. He had taken hundreds of pictures along the coast that afternoon. Waves crashing against granite cliffs. The lighthouse standing against a brilliant blue sky. A flock of gulls rising into the wind. Yet he kept returning to the final image. A woman standing at Gray Point. She faced the Atlantic, holding the miniature sailboat he had left behind only an hour earlier. The distance made her face impossible to identify with certainty. But something about the way she stood felt strangely familiar. The same posture. The same slight tilt of her head. A memory he had carried since childhood suddenly felt less like imagination. He enlarged the photograph again. The pixels blurred. No answers appeared. Still, he couldn't convince himself it was only coincidence. The following morning, Noah drove back to Black Harbor earlier than usual. Fog covered the coastline, drifting slowly across the cliffs like pale smoke. The lighthouse appeared and disappeared behind the mist every few seconds, giving the entire peninsula an unreal quality. He parked beside Samuel's cottage. The old lighthouse keeper was already outside, repairing one of the porch steps. Without looking up, Samuel smiled. "You saw the photograph." Noah stopped. "You knew." Samuel finally raised his eyes. "I've known for 2 days. Why didn't you tell me?" Samuel rested the hammer on the porch railing. "Because sometimes people spend so much time chasing certainty that they forget to trust the journey." Noah laughed quietly. "You always answer questions like a lighthouse." Samuel smiled. "Old men become philosophical because nobody asks us to move furniture anymore." For the first time in days, Noah genuinely laughed. The sound echoed softly across the quiet harbor. Samuel reached into his pocket and handed him a folded sheet of paper. It was the visitor log for the lighthouse. Only one name had been added that weekend. Sophia Bennett. Noah stared at the handwriting. His heartbeat quickened. It was real. She had come. After 23 years. She had finally come. When? He asked. Saturday. I missed her by less than an hour. Samuel nodded. So did she. Neither man spoke for several moments. The Atlantic filled the silence. Finally Noah looked toward the lighthouse. What now? Samuel shrugged. That depends. On what? Whether you're searching for the girl you remember. Or the woman she's become. The question followed Noah long after he left the cottage. He drove slowly through the village, replaying old memories that had remained untouched for decades. He remembered Sophia laughing when his wooden sailboat drifted back toward shore. He remembered her insisting that every lighthouse looked lonely because it was always waiting for someone. He remembered promising they would meet again. For years he had believed he was preserving a childhood memory. Now he realized something different. He had been preserving hope. Back in Boston, Sophia found herself unable to concentrate at work. She reread Noah's final letter during lunch. Then she looked once more at the photograph she had discovered inside the museum archives. The image showed a thoughtful man standing beside Black Harbor Lighthouse with a camera hanging from his shoulder. She wondered what had changed him over the years. What dreams had he achieved? Which ones had he abandoned? How many times had life disappointed him? She realized she knew 23 years of his thoughts. But almost nothing about his life. Late that afternoon, Olivia entered Sophia's office carrying a folder of exhibition plans. She immediately noticed the open photograph on the desk. Who's that? Sophia hesitated. A stranger. Olivia smiled. You don't look at strangers like that. Sophia laughed. It's a very long story. I have time. For nearly an hour, Sophia told her everything. The mysterious letter. Black Harbor. Samuel. The wooden box. 23 years of waiting. When she finished, Olivia remained unusually quiet. Finally she asked only one question. What are you afraid of? Sophia looked out the office window. I don't know who he'll expect to meet. Olivia shook her head gently. After 23 years. I don't think either of you is looking for a child anymore. That evening, Noah returned to his photography studio in Boston. His assistant greeted him with a stack of client messages. Most could wait. One could not. An invitation from the Boston Maritime Museum. The museum planned a new exhibition celebrating historic New England lighthouses. They wanted Noah to become the lead photographer for the project. The opening planning meeting would take place the following Thursday. He almost declined. Then he noticed the name printed beneath the invitation. Project Curator, Sophia Bennett. He read the page again. Then a third time. The room became completely silent. Thousands of people worked in Boston's museums. Thousands. And somehow, the woman he had searched for every August since childhood was organizing the very exhibition that had just invited him. Noah slowly lowered the letter. Outside the studio window, evening sunlight reflected across Boston Harbor. For the first time in 23 years, he no longer needed to drive to a lighthouse. Fate had quietly arranged something neither of them could have imagined. Across the city, only a few miles away, Sophia closed her office for the evening. An email notification appeared on her computer just as she prepared to leave. It contained the list of photographers selected for the museum's upcoming exhibition. She almost closed it without reading. Then one name caught her eye. Noah Sullivan. Her heart skipped. The planning meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. 10 o'clock. Conference room 3. She looked at the calendar for a long moment. After 23 years. After countless missed moments. After arriving too late again and again. Only 4 days remained before they would finally stand in the same room. Neither of them knew what they would say. Neither of them knew whether the memories of 2 children could survive inside 2 adults. But for the first time since a promise had been made beside Black Harbor Lighthouse. Neither of them would arrive too late. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies over Boston. The city looked unusually bright after nearly a week of rain. Sunlight reflected from the glass towers of the seaport district while ferries crossed the harbor beneath calm blue water. Sophia had barely slept. She stood before her apartment mirror longer than she cared to admit, changing jackets twice before finally choosing the simplest one. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore. She didn't believe herself. The museum was already busy when she arrived. Staff members hurried through the lobby carrying exhibition models, historical artifacts, and stacks of presentation materials. The upcoming Lighthouse exhibition had become the institution's largest project of the year. Normally, Sophia loved opening days like this. Today she noticed almost nothing. Conference room 3 stood at the end of the second-floor hallway. The meeting would begin at 10. She arrived at 9:30. Far too early. She reviewed the presentation one final time, though she already knew every page by heart. Her hands remained perfectly steady while organizing papers. Only her heartbeat refused to cooperate. At exactly 9:58, footsteps echoed outside the conference room. Several photographers entered together, greeting museum staff with relaxed conversation. Sophia looked up automatically. None of them was Noah. She quietly exhaled. Perhaps he had cancelled. Perhaps another assignment had delayed him. Perhaps fate had found one final way to keep them apart. Then the door opened once more. A man stepped inside carrying a weathered leather camera bag over one shoulder. He paused just inside the entrance while scanning the room. Sophia immediately recognized him. The years had changed him exactly as she expected. He was taller than the boy she remembered. His dark hair showed the first hints of gray near his temples. His face carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent years observing the world through a camera lens. Only his eyes remained exactly the same. Blue. Thoughtful. Quietly searching. For a brief moment neither of them moved. The conversations around the room continued normally. People unpacked laptops. Coffee cups touched the table. Chairs slid across the floor. No one else noticed that two lives had just quietly collided after 23 years. Noah recognized her almost immediately. Not because she looked exactly like the little girl from the photograph. Because something in her smile remained completely unchanged. The same smile he had remembered every August beside the lighthouse. The museum director interrupted the silence by welcoming everyone to the project. Noah took the only empty seat remaining. It happened to be directly across from Sophia. Neither of them had chosen it. The meeting began. Sophia presented the exhibition schedule with the professionalism she had practiced for years. She explained restoration procedures, photography requirements, transportation logistics, and historical research standards. Her voice remained calm. Only once did she accidentally lose her place while reading. Each time she looked up from her notes, Noah was listening attentively. Not staring. Simply listening. As though trying to learn the person sitting before him rather than compare her to an old memory. He appreciated that. She appreciated it too. When the meeting ended, everyone slowly gathered their belongings. Conversations divided naturally into smaller groups. Some discussed budgets. Others reviewed photography locations. Within minutes the conference room began emptying. Eventually only Sophia and Noah remained. Neither seemed eager to leave. For several seconds they simply looked at one another. Finally, Noah smiled. I don't think either of us expected the museum. Sophia laughed softly. No. I expected another lighthouse. So did I. The simplicity of the conversation immediately dissolved the tension both had carried into the room. There was no dramatic reunion. No overwhelming emotion. Only two adults discovering that speaking to each other felt unexpectedly easy. They walked together through one of the museum galleries. Around them stood restored ship models, antique navigation instruments, and paintings of stormy seas. History surrounded them once again. Only this time, they were no longer studying someone else's story. They were quietly continuing their own. I read your letters, Sophia said. Noah nodded. I guessed you might. I'm sorry. He looked at her with genuine confusion. For what? For forgetting. He stopped walking. Sunlight entered through the gallery windows, illuminating countless tiny dust particles drifting between them. You were 10. You moved across the country. You lived your life. There isn't anything to forgive. She felt tears gathering unexpectedly. I should have remembered. Noah smiled gently. I remembered enough for both of us. The sentence carried no accusation. Only kindness. Perhaps that was why it affected her so deeply. They continued walking. Sophia told him about Samuel. The wooden box. The visitor log. The miniature sailboat at Grey Point. Noah admitted leaving one there every year. In case someone arrived after I left. I found this year's. I know. She looked at him. You know. He reached into his camera bag. Carefully, he removed a printed photograph. It was the image he had taken from the cliffs. Sophia stood alone at Grey Point holding the tiny sailboat against the Atlantic horizon. You were there. I was. She stared at the photograph. You saw me. I did. And you didn't come over. He smiled. You looked like someone having a conversation with the ocean. I didn't want to interrupt. Sophia laughed. I probably was. They reached the museum cafe overlooking Boston Harbor. Neither suggested leaving. Instead they ordered coffee and sat beside the windows. Hours passed almost unnoticed. They spoke about childhood. College. Photography. Museum work. Samuel. Black Harbor. Family. Books. Travel. Failures. Dreams. Nothing felt forced. What surprised them most was not how much they remembered. It was how much they still had to discover. Late in the afternoon Noah finally asked the question that had remained quietly between them since the beginning. Do you know why I kept returning? Sophia thought for a moment. Because of the promise? He shook his head. At first. Then because every year I hoped. He looked toward Boston Harbor where sailboats drifted beneath the afternoon sun. But eventually. I realized the lighthouse reminded me of the kind of person I wanted to become. She waited. If a 10-year-old version of me could keep a promise for 23 years. Then the adult version of me had no excuse for giving up on anything else. Sophia understood. The lighthouse had never imprisoned him. It had shaped him. She reached into her bag and carefully placed the final letter on the table. I brought this back. Noah looked at the envelope. You should keep it. It belongs to you. He slowly pushed it back toward her. No. It belongs to the person who finally came. Outside, the afternoon sunlight began fading across the harbor. Neither of them noticed the time. Neither realized that Samuel, sitting quietly on the porch of his little cottage beside Black Harbor Lighthouse, had looked toward the ocean only moments earlier and smiled to himself. Old lighthouse keepers understood tides better than anyone. They also understood people. Some journeys looked delayed. Others simply arrived exactly when they were supposed to. The weeks that followed passed with surprising ease. Neither Sophia nor Noah tried to define what was happening between them. After waiting 23 years to meet again, they both understood that some things lost their meaning when rushed. Instead, they allowed life to unfold naturally. The lighthouse exhibition became the center of their days. Every morning they met at the museum before visitors arrived. Together they reviewed historical photographs, selected exhibition pieces, and discussed the stories behind each lighthouse featured in the collection. Sophia discovered that Noah approached photography the same way she approached history. Neither cared only about appearances. Both searched for the lives hidden beneath them. When Noah photographed an abandoned lighthouse, he never focused solely on the building. He photographed worn staircases, rusted lanterns, faded logbooks, forgotten footprints in the sand. He believed places became meaningful because of the people who had loved them. Sophia understood that immediately. One afternoon they worked alone in the museum archives. Thousands of photographs filled long metal cabinets stretching across the room. Together they searched for additional images of Black Harbor Lighthouse. Hours passed quietly. Occasionally one of them found something worth sharing. An old postcard. A newspaper clipping. A faded map. Then Noah opened a small archival envelope that had not been catalogued. Inside rested several photographs taken more than 30 years earlier. One immediately caught his attention. It showed Samuel standing beside the lighthouse with a much younger man. The resemblance was unmistakable. "This is my father," Noah said softly. Sophia looked closer. She had never seen a photograph of Noah's parents. The young man stood proudly beside Samuel, wearing a lighthouse maintenance uniform. "He worked here?" she asked. Noah nodded. "For almost 10 years. He smiled faintly. "He always said the lighthouse taught him patience." The sentence sounded strangely familiar. Sophia suddenly understood where Noah had learned so much of his quiet strength. Some lessons were inherited without anyone noticing. That evening, after the museum closed, they walked along Boston Harbor. The city reflected brilliantly across calm water. Restaurants filled with evening conversations. Street musicians performed beneath old brick buildings. The air carried the scent of salt mixed with fresh bread from nearby cafes. Neither hurried. For years, both had lived in Boston. Yet somehow the city felt entirely different now. They spoke about ordinary things. Favorite books. Music. Childhood vacations. Embarrassing school memories. The conversations were simple. Exactly because they were simple, they mattered. Sophia realized she no longer felt like she was speaking to someone from her past. She was getting to know someone in her present. The following weekend they returned to Black Harbor together. Samuel waited on his porch as though he had known the exact hour they would arrive. He looked at the two of them standing side by side and smiled without surprise. "I was beginning to think Boston might keep you forever." Noah laughed. "It almost did." Samuel invited them inside for lunch. The cottage felt exactly as Sophia remembered. The same fireplace. The same maritime charts. The same old clocks ticking gently against the walls. Only one thing had changed. The wooden box of letters no longer sat on the table. Samuel noticed Sophia looking around. "I put it away." She looked at him. "Why?" He smiled. "Because letters belong to people who are separated. You two don't need them anymore." No one answered. No answer was necessary. Later that afternoon they climbed the narrow staircase inside Black Harbor Lighthouse. Samuel had arranged special permission from the local historical society. The heavy iron door at the top opened onto the lantern gallery. The view took Sophia's breath away. The Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction. The village below appeared tiny. Fishing boats drifted across the water like scattered white shells. Noah stood beside the railing. "I used to imagine this view every year after I left." Sophia looked toward the horizon. "I spent 23 years forgetting." He turned toward her. "And I spent 23 years remembering." She smiled sadly. "Seems unfair." "No." He shook his head. "It brought us here." The wind carried away the silence between them. As the sun slowly descended toward the horizon, Samuel remained downstairs, leaving them alone at the top of the lighthouse. Sophia rested both hands against the cool metal railing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd come back the next summer?" Noah thought for a long moment. "When I was younger. Every day. And now." He smiled. "Now I think we would have become different people." She looked at him. "I don't know whether we'd still be standing here." Sophia considered his words. The child she had been could never have imagined the woman she would become. Neither could the boy who carved tiny sailboats from driftwood. Perhaps time had not stolen their story. Perhaps it had written the only version that could truly belong to them. Before leaving the lighthouse, Noah reached into his backpack. He removed the unfinished miniature sailboat Samuel had shown Sophia days earlier. "I finished it." She held it carefully. The tiny white sail no longer stood blank. Instead, Noah had painted two small figures walking toward a lighthouse. Not standing apart. Walking together. On the bottom of the wooden hull he had carved today's date. Beneath it, only 4 words. "We finally made it." Sophia looked up at him. For a moment neither spoke. The silence carried no uncertainty now. Only peace. Far below them, waves continued breaking against the rocks exactly as they had 23 years earlier. Some things never changed. Others changed just enough to become exactly what they were always meant to be. As evening settled over Black Harbor, none of them noticed the elderly couple standing quietly near the harbor below. The woman smiled toward the lighthouse. "They look happy." Her husband nodded. They waited long enough. Neither Sophia nor Noah recognized them. But Samuel did. He waved warmly as they drove away. The couple had once met at Black Harbor Lighthouse more than 50 years earlier after exchanging letters during college. Every generation, Samuel thought, deserved at least one story that reminded them patience was not the opposite of love. Sometimes. It was simply another way of proving it. Winter settled over New England almost unnoticed. The brilliant colors of late autumn disappeared beneath gray skies, and cold Atlantic winds swept across both Boston Harbor and the quiet coastline surrounding Black Harbor Lighthouse. Snow arrived early that year, covering rooftops, fishing docks, and narrow village roads in a blanket of white that softened every familiar landmark. For Sophia and Noah, life slowly found a rhythm that neither had expected. The excitement of finally meeting faded into something quieter. Something stronger. They no longer counted days since the museum conference or measured time by missed opportunities. Instead, they built ordinary routines together. Every Thursday morning they met before work at a small bakery near the harbor. Noah always arrived first, ordering 2 coffees before Sophia walked through the door carrying another stack of museum notes she insisted she wouldn't discuss over breakfast. Within 5 minutes she was usually talking enthusiastically about restoration techniques or newly discovered maritime journals. Noah never complained. He liked watching her become animated while speaking about history. She looked different when she forgot someone was observing her. Less guarded. More alive. Sophia, in return, began accompanying Noah during short photography trips across Massachusetts and coastal Maine. She quickly realized photography demanded far more patience than she had imagined. Noah often spent an entire hour waiting for the exact movement of clouds across the sky. Sometimes another 30 minutes waiting for a fishing boat to drift into the perfect position. Other times he photographed nothing at all. When she asked why, he simply smiled. Not every beautiful moment wants to be captured. She began understanding what he meant. Some memories existed more comfortably inside people than inside photographs. One snowy Saturday they returned once again to Black Harbor. Samuel had invited them for dinner. The old lighthouse keeper insisted he had cooked enough seafood chowder to feed an entire fishing crew despite living alone. He wasn't exaggerating. The kitchen table overflowed with homemade bread, fresh chowder, roasted vegetables, blueberry pie, and hot cider. Halfway through dinner Samuel disappeared into another room. When he returned, he carried an old wooden chest neither of them had seen before. He placed it gently on the table. This belonged to the lighthouse. Noah looked surprised. "I've never seen it." "You weren't supposed to." Samuel smiled. "The Historical Society finally agreed it belongs with someone who'll appreciate it." Inside rested dozens of weathered logbooks dating back more than a century. Each had been written by lighthouse keepers who had lived alone beside the Atlantic for years. Sophia carefully opened the oldest volume. Every page described weather conditions, ship movements, repairs, and tides. But occasionally, between official records, the keepers had written personal thoughts. One entry from 1913 caught her attention. "Storms always pass. Loneliness doesn't. Thankfully, neither lasts forever if someone eventually finds the light." She looked at Noah. He smiled quietly. Lighthouse keepers really did become philosophers. Samuel laughed. "Spend enough winters talking only to seagulls and you'll start writing poetry too." The evening ended with all 3 of them sitting on the porch despite the freezing temperature. Snowflakes drifted gently through the beam of the lighthouse. The ocean remained almost invisible beneath the darkness. Only the sound of waves revealed its presence. Samuel spoke very little. He simply watched the 2 younger people beside him. For years he had guarded letters belonging to strangers. Now those strangers had become family in a way no one had expected. Several weeks later, the museum exhibition officially opened. Hundreds of visitors filled the galleries during the first weekend. Newspapers praised Noah's photography for capturing the emotional solitude of New England's lighthouses rather than simply documenting their architecture. Sophia received equal praise for weaving personal stories into the exhibition instead of presenting only historical facts. Together they had created something neither could have accomplished alone. Late Sunday afternoon, after the museum closed, they quietly walked through the empty galleries. Without visitors, the exhibition felt entirely different. Peaceful. Almost intimate. They stopped before the largest photograph in the collection. Black Harbor Lighthouse stood beneath a dramatic sunrise. Golden light spread across the Atlantic while waves shimmered against the cliffs. Sophia recognized the image immediately. "You took this after I left, didn't you?" Noah nodded. "The morning after." She looked at the photograph for a long time. "If I'd stayed one more day." He gently interrupted her. "You'd still be looking backward." She turned toward him. "We're finally looking forward." The words settled comfortably between them. For the first time, neither of them wondered what might have happened years earlier. They cared only about tomorrow. As spring slowly approached, Noah received an unexpected offer. A prestigious gallery in San Francisco invited him to present a year-long exhibition documenting America's historic coastlines. The opportunity could transform his career. It would also require moving across the country for nearly 12 months. He stared at the contract for several days before mentioning it to Sophia. She listened quietly without interrupting. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know. You've dreamed about opportunities like this." "I have." She smiled. "Then why are you hesitating?" He looked at her. "I spent 23 years trying not to lose you. I don't want distance to become another lighthouse." Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. "We aren't children anymore." He remained silent. A promise made by children survived 23 years. She smiled warmly. "I think 2 adults can survive 12 months. Noah laughed softly. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be." She squeezed his hand gently. "But the difference is, this time we'll know exactly where to find each other." Outside the cafe window, evening sunlight reflected across Boston Harbor. Sailboats moved slowly through the calm water. Neither of them knew what the coming year would bring. But for the first time in either of their lives, uncertainty no longer felt frightening. Because hope was no longer something one person carried alone. It belonged to both of them now. Spring arrived slowly along the New England coast. The snow disappeared first from Boston, leaving behind parks filled with blooming trees and sidewalks crowded once again with tourists. Farther north, the cliffs surrounding Black Harbor remained cool beneath Atlantic winds, but patches of green had begun appearing between the rocks where winter had finally surrendered. 3 months had passed since Sophia and Noah first met again. Their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm neither had tried to force. There were no dramatic declarations. No hurried promises. Only quiet certainty. They learned each other's habits almost without noticing. Sophia always arrived 10 minutes early for everything. Noah was almost always exactly on time. She collected antique books she rarely had time to read. He bought notebooks he almost never filled. She preferred rainy afternoons because museums became quieter. He preferred cloudy mornings because photographs gained softer light. They laughed at how different they were. They appreciated even more how naturally those differences fit together. One Friday evening, as they finished closing the Lighthouse exhibition, Noah finally made his decision. He accepted the offer from the San Francisco gallery. The email left his outbox just before sunset. Neither celebrated. Neither mourned. The decision felt too significant for either reaction. Instead, they walked silently toward Boston Harbor. The waterfront glowed beneath the golden light of early evening. Street musicians played soft melodies while ferries crossed the harbor carrying commuters home. Sophia leaned against the railing overlooking the water. "So?" Noah nodded. "So?" She smiled. "I always imagined big decisions would feel bigger. They usually don't." He looked toward the horizon. "They simply become another day." His departure was scheduled for the beginning of June. 7 weeks remained. Rather than counting down, they decided to spend every weekend somewhere new. Not because they feared the coming distance. Because they finally understood how quickly ordinary moments became memories. They visited Cape Cod before summer crowds arrived. Walked through forgotten fishing villages in Rhode Island. Photographed abandoned piers along the Connecticut shoreline. Explored bookstores hidden inside old churches in Vermont. Every place seemed connected by the same quiet theme. Lighthouses. Harbors. The sea. One afternoon they discovered a tiny antique shop outside Portsmouth. Near the back of the store, hidden beneath stacks of old maps, Sophia found a weathered brass compass. Its glass was scratched. Its needle still pointed faithfully north. An inscription covered the back. Home is not where you begin. It's where someone waits for you. She turned it over in her hands several times. Without saying a word, Noah bought it before she reached the counter. Later that evening he handed it to her. For the museum? She smiled knowingly. No. For whenever you forget which direction matters. She kept the compass in her bag from that day forward. As June approached, preparations for Noah's move accelerated. Photography equipment disappeared into shipping crates. His apartment slowly emptied. Maps came down from the walls. Books disappeared into boxes. Every packed object made the departure feel slightly more real. Sophia helped whenever she could. She folded clothes. Wrapped fragile camera lenses. Labeled storage boxes. Occasionally they stopped working simply to laugh at objects Noah had forgotten he owned. A broken alarm clock. A collection of seashells gathered from dozens of coastlines. The unfinished sketchbook he had abandoned after deciding photography suited him better than drawing. Life revealed itself inside cardboard boxes. The evening before his flight, they drove to Black Harbor one final time before summer. Samuel waited outside the cottage with 3 folding chairs facing the ocean. I figured you'd want to watch one more sunset. None of them argued. The 3 sat quietly beneath the lighthouse while the Atlantic reflected shades of orange, pink, and deep blue. For a long time no one spoke. Finally Samuel broke the silence. When I was young, I thought lighthouses existed to guide ships. He smiled toward the horizon. It took me 50 years to realize they mostly guide people. Noah looked at him. You always knew we'd meet again, didn't you? Samuel considered the question carefully. No. I simply believed some promises deserve enough time. As darkness settled over the coastline, Samuel stood and disappeared briefly into the cottage. When he returned, he carried a small wooden frame. Inside rested the photograph of 2 children standing beside Black Harbor Lighthouse. The same photograph Sophia had found during her first visit. Samuel handed it to them. I think my job is finished. Neither of them spoke. The old lighthouse keeper had spent more than 2 decades protecting a memory that wasn't his own. Now he was finally letting it go. The next morning Boston Logan Airport buzzed with travelers beginning summer vacations. Departure boards flickered constantly while announcements echoed through crowded terminals. Sophia stood beside Noah near the security entrance. Neither liked dramatic goodbyes. Neither wanted this one. It's only a year, she said quietly. He smiled. We've survived longer. She laughed. Fair point. He reached into his backpack and removed a small envelope. For you. She looked at him suspiciously. Another letter? Only one. You promised to stop writing them. I lied. She smiled. I'll read it after you leave. He nodded. Good. A boarding announcement interrupted them. For a moment they simply looked at one another. No elaborate speeches felt necessary. No promises needed repeating. They had already proven that promises could survive time. Noah gently kissed her forehead before picking up his camera bag. I'll see you soon. You will. He disappeared into the security line without looking back. Not because he didn't want to. Because he trusted they would meet again. Sophia watched until he vanished from sight. Only then did she open the envelope. Inside rested a single photograph. It had been taken secretly several weeks earlier. Sophia stood inside the museum archive, smiling as she examined an old maritime journal, completely unaware anyone was watching. On the back Noah had written only one sentence. You were never the person I spent 23 years waiting for. You became someone even better. Sophia smiled through quiet tears. Outside the terminal windows, Noah's airplane began taxiing toward the runway. Ahead of them lay 12 months. A different coast. Thousands of miles. But neither feared the distance anymore. Because the lighthouse had taught them its greatest lesson. Love was never measured by how close two people stood. It was measured by whether they kept finding their way back to each other. San Francisco welcomed Noah with endless sunlight. The Pacific Ocean looked nothing like the Atlantic. The waves were larger, the coastline more rugged, and the light possessed a warmer color that transformed every sunset into something almost unreal. For any photographer, it was paradise. Yet during his first weeks there, Noah found himself instinctively comparing everything to the coast of Maine. The Golden Gate Bridge was breathtaking. But it wasn't Black Harbor Lighthouse. The cliffs overlooking Big Sur were magnificent. But they didn't carry the same memories. The Pacific was beautiful. The Atlantic still felt like home. His exhibition preparations quickly consumed his days. He traveled constantly along California's coastline, photographing historic lighthouses from San Diego to Mendocino. Every location had its own story, its own history, its own lonely keeper who had once watched over ships crossing dangerous waters. Every evening, no matter where he finished working, he called Sophia. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes only 10 minutes. Neither measured the conversations by their length. They simply enjoyed hearing the other's voice. Back in Boston, Sophia's days became equally busy. The Lighthouse exhibition exceeded every expectation. Visitors arrived from across the country. Universities requested guided tours. Several historical societies offered partnerships for future projects. Her colleagues often joked that she spent more time discussing lighthouses than actual lighthouse keepers ever had. She secretly thought they were probably right. Despite the success, evenings felt noticeably quieter. She often found herself walking along Boston Harbor after work, stopping at the same cafe where she and Noah had shared countless conversations. The staff still remembered both of them. One afternoon the owner smiled as she entered. "Your photographer still in California?" Sophia nodded. "For a while. He'll be back." The certainty in the man's voice made her smile. "I know." Summer slowly turned into autumn. Thousands of miles apart, they continued building a life together in small ways. They watched the same movies while talking over video calls. Read the same books. Cooked the same recipes despite living in different time zones. On Sunday mornings they drank coffee together through laptop screens, laughing whenever unstable internet connections froze one of them into particularly embarrassing expressions. Distance became inconvenient. It never became frightening. In October, Noah returned briefly to Boston for a photography conference. Neither told the other exactly when they would arrive. Instead, they agreed on something simpler. The museum. Conference Room 3. 10 o'clock in the morning. Exactly where they had first met again. Sophia entered the room 5 minutes early. Some habits never changed. She placed a notebook on the conference table before looking toward the doorway. At precisely 10 o'clock, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Noah appeared carrying the same weathered leather camera bag. For a second, both laughed. "It seems we finally learned how to arrive on time," Sophia said. "I was afraid you'd beat me here. I almost tried." They spent the entire weekend together. No elaborate plans. No expensive restaurants. No tourist attractions. They simply enjoyed ordinary moments that distance had taught them never to underestimate. They wandered through bookstores. Walked beside the harbor. Visited the museum after closing hours. One evening they climbed onto the rooftop observation deck overlooking the city. Boston shimmered beneath countless lights. Sophia rested her head against Noah's shoulder. "Do you ever miss waiting?" He looked at her in surprise. "Waiting?" "The letters. The lighthouse. The hope." He considered the question carefully. "Sometimes." She looked up. "Really?" He nodded. "Waiting taught me gratitude." He smiled gently. But I wouldn't trade what we have just to experience waiting again. She squeezed his hand. Neither would I. Too soon, the weekend ended. This goodbye felt easier. Not because they cared less. Because they trusted more. Winter arrived once again. Just before Christmas, Samuel called. His voice sounded cheerful, but softer than usual. I think it's time you both came home. Neither asked why. 2 days later, they met in Maine. Snow covered Black Harbor more heavily than either had ever seen. The lighthouse stood proudly above the frozen cliffs, its beam cutting through the early evening darkness exactly as it always had. Samuel waited inside the cottage. The fire burned brightly. A small Christmas tree stood beside the window, decorated with handmade wooden sailboats instead of ornaments. He smiled warmly as they entered. I wanted one more Christmas with both of you. The three spent hours sharing stories beside the fire. Samuel spoke about storms from decades earlier. Noah shared photographs from California. Sophia described the museum's newest restoration projects. Late that evening, Samuel stood with some effort and walked toward the old wooden chest containing the lighthouse logbooks. He closed the lid gently. You know. He looked at both of them. I used to think my purpose was protecting this lighthouse. His smile became thoughtful. It turns out. I was protecting two people until they found each other. Silence filled the room. Outside, snow continued falling softly over Black Harbor. The lighthouse beam swept across the frozen coastline. Samuel looked toward the window with peaceful eyes. You won't need me much longer. Neither Sophia nor Noah liked the sound of those words. But deep inside, both understood what he meant. Some people entered our lives to stay forever. Others entered to guide us toward the people who would. And perhaps that was enough. The fire crackled quietly as the three of them sat together, watching snow fall over the Atlantic. None of them realized it would become one of the most precious evenings they would ever share. A year passed more quickly than either of them expected. California transformed Noah's career. His exhibition traveled through galleries in San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and Los Angeles. Photography magazines featured his work. Universities invited him to speak about preserving America's coastal history through visual storytelling. Every success felt meaningful. None of them felt complete without someone to share them with. Sophia experienced a similar year in Boston. Following the success of the Lighthouse exhibition, she was promoted to Director of Historical Collections at the museum. It was the position she had dreamed about since graduating from college. The promotion came with greater responsibility, longer hours, and more opportunities than she had ever imagined. When she called Noah with the news, he celebrated as though the achievement belonged equally to both of them. Perhaps it did. Every difficult year they had survived separately had quietly prepared them for the life they were now building together. Spring arrived once again. Almost exactly 1 year after Noah had left for California, he returned permanently to Boston. This time there were no goodbyes waiting on the other side of the journey. Only beginnings. Sophia met him at the airport. No dramatic speeches. No rushing through the terminal. The moment felt strangely ordinary. They embraced quietly while travelers hurried around them, unaware that two people who had once been separated by 23 years had finally run out of reasons to say goodbye. Several weeks later they drove to Black Harbor once again. The village looked exactly as it always had. Fishing boats floated gently beside the docks. The old general store still stood at the center of town. Children laughed while chasing one another along the harbor. Time had continued moving forward without ever abandoning the place. Samuel's cottage appeared peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. His rocking chair rested on the porch. A bouquet of fresh wildflowers stood beside the front door. Sophia immediately sensed something had changed. The cottage felt unusually quiet. An elderly woman from the neighboring house stepped onto her porch as they approached. She recognized Noah instantly. "I'm glad you came." Noah's smile slowly disappeared. "Where's Samuel?" The woman lowered her eyes for a moment. "He passed away in February." The word seemed to stop the wind itself. Neither Noah nor Sophia spoke. The woman gently handed Noah a small wooden box. "He asked me to give you this if you ever return together. Nothing more." Nothing needed explaining. They carried the box toward the lighthouse before opening it. Inside rested a single envelope. Beneath it lay Samuel's old brass lighthouse key. Noah unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting looked weaker than before but remained unmistakably Samuel's. If you're reading this, then my favorite lighthouse no longer needs a keeper. Not because its light has gone out. Because two people finally found their way home. I've spent most of my life believing that every lighthouse exists for ships. I was wrong. They exist to remind people that no matter how dark the night becomes, someone always leaves a light burning. You two became that light for each other. Don't waste another year wondering whether tomorrow is guaranteed. It isn't. Go live the life you've already waited long enough to begin. Sophia quietly wiped away tears. Noah carefully folded the letter again before placing it back inside the box. Neither noticed that the sun had begun setting. Almost automatically they climbed the familiar path toward Black Harbor Lighthouse. Using Samuel's old key, Noah unlocked the heavy wooden door. The staircase creaked exactly as it always had. Each step echoed softly through the tower. When they reached the lantern gallery, the Atlantic stretched endlessly before them. The view remained unchanged. The ocean still met the horizon in every direction. The cliffs still stood against the waves. The wind still carried the scent of salt. Some places truly existed outside time. Sophia rested her hands on the railing. I think he knew. Noah looked toward the horizon. He always knew more than he admitted. She smiled. He spent 23 years protecting our story. And never once tried to write it for us. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not the silence of strangers. The silence of two people who no longer needed words to understand one another. Noah reached into his jacket pocket. Sophia laughed immediately. Another letter? He smiled. No. This time he removed a small velvet box. Her smile faded into quiet surprise. He opened it. Inside rested a simple ring crafted from white gold. Its design was elegant. On the inside of the band, tiny engraved words circled the metal. Maybe next year. Sophia looked at him through tears. You kept the phrase. He nodded. I changed the ending. He turned the ring slightly. Beneath the first engraving another line completed the sentence. Not anymore. The Atlantic wind carried away the silence that followed. Sophia laughed softly through tears before answering. You really waited 23 years to improve that sentence. I had plenty of time to think about it. She nodded. Then my answer probably won't surprise you. It won't. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Far below, waves continued breaking against the rocks exactly as they had on the afternoon two children had promised to meet again. Nothing about the ocean had changed. Everything about them had. That summer they married in Black Harbor. The ceremony was small. Family. Close friends. Museum colleagues. Several photographers Noah had met throughout his career. The village church proved too small for everyone, so the reception took place beside the lighthouse overlooking the Atlantic. Instead of expensive decorations, miniature wooden sailboats stood on every table. Each guest received one before leaving. On the bottom of every boat the same words had been carved. Keep finding your way home. Years later, visitors to Black Harbor often noticed two things. The first was the old lighthouse, still faithfully guiding ships through fog and darkness. The second was a framed photograph displayed inside the small maritime museum that eventually opened beside it. The photograph showed two children holding tiny wooden sailboats beneath a bright summer sky. Beside it hung another photograph taken 23 years later. The same two people stood together on the lantern gallery of Black Harbor Lighthouse, smiling toward the endless Atlantic. The caption beneath both photographs read, "Some promises take longer to keep. That doesn't make them any less true." And whenever children visiting the museum asked whether the story had really happened, the guides always smiled before giving the same answer Samuel himself would probably have given. Every lighthouse keeps secrets. This one simply decided to share one.